The night was silent, until a gunshot shattered it. Ethan rushed outside, only to find the one creature he loved most lying still. That was the moment everything changed. He didn't call the police. He didn't cry. He made a promise. Someone was going to pay. Ethan's life was quiet, almost invisible. He lived on the edge of town, in a small house tucked behind tall pines. To most, he was just another man in the neighborhood, someone they saw but didn't really know. But to Ethan, all that mattered was Max. Max wasn't just a dog. He was Ethan's anchor, the kind of loyal companion who understood silence better than words. When Ethan sat in his worn-out chair with a cup of black coffee, Max rested by his side. When Ethan walked down the narrow streets at dusk, Max trotted proudly beside him, his tail swaying like a metronome keeping time with Ethan's steps. The neighbors noticed the pair. Some would wave. Others would smile and whisper, "That man really loves his dog." But no one understood how deep it went. Max wasn't just love. Max was survival. Years earlier, Ethan had lost his wife. A sudden accident, the kind that shatters a man in a single night. Friends tried to comfort him, but grief doesn't respond to sympathy. For a long time, Ethan lived in shadows, locked away from the world, until Max came into his life. That dog wasn't just company, he was hope. And slowly, day by day, Ethan began to live again. The days were quiet, repetitive almost, but in that repetition, Ethan found peace. Mornings began with coffee and feeding Max. Afternoons passed with small tasks around the house, sometimes fixing things that didn't need fixing just to keep busy. Evenings belonged to their walks. It was during those walks that Ethan felt something close to happiness. The cool air, the rhythm of their steps, the sound of Max's leash jingling. It was simple, but it was enough. And then came that night. The air was colder than usual, sharp against Ethan's skin. Streetlights glowed in patches, leaving long stretches of shadow between them. Ethan and Max had just returned from their walk. Ethan poured himself another cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. That's when it happened. A single gunshot. It cut through the night like lightning, sharp, sudden, and impossible to mistake. Ethan's body froze. His heart pounded, his mind raced. Then silence. Not the normal kind, but the kind that presses against your chest, suffocating. Ethan ran outside, his coffee cup shattering against the floor as it slipped from his hand. The driveway felt endless as his eyes searched desperately in the dark. And then he saw him. Maximum. Lying still. No movement. No sound. The world around Ethan blurred. His ears rang. His knees buckled as he fell beside Max, hands shaking as he reached out. There was no saving him. Something broke inside Ethan in that moment. A sound tried to escape his throat, but no cry came out. Just silence. Cold, burning silence. He didn't call the police. He didn't scream for help. He didn't cry. Instead, his mind locked onto a single thought, repeating like a drumbeat he couldn't ignore. Someone will pay for this. The days after Max's death bled into one another, a haze of silence and stale air. Ethan barely ate. He barely moved. The house wasn't home anymore. It was a museum of memories he couldn't escape. The leash by the door, the half-full bag of dog food in the pantry. The old tennis ball stuck under the couch. Each detail was a knife twisting in his chest. Ethan sat at the kitchen table one night, staring at Max's empty bowl. His hand rested on the wooden surface, fingers tapping out of habit, like he was waiting for Max to come running at the sound. But no paws echoed across the floor. No tail wagged against the chair. Just silence. And then the fire came. A slow, smoldering ember deep inside, growing hotter every hour. Grief was being replaced by something sharper. Revenge. The memories wouldn't stop coming. At first they hurt, then they became fuel. He remembered Max as a puppy, tiny, clumsy, all ears and paws. Ethan had been broken then, still raw from losing his wife. He hadn't wanted the dog, but Max hadn't cared. He followed Ethan everywhere, even when Ethan tried to push him away. One night, Ethan had sat outside in the rain, a bottle in his hand, ready to drown himself in it. Max had nudged the bottle out of his grip with his nose, then curled up beside him. For the first time in months, Ethan hadn't felt alone. From that day on, Max was family. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself back to the present. Whoever pulled that trigger hadn't just taken a dog, they'd ripped away the last thread holding Ethan together. So he started asking questions, neighbors, strangers, anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. Most shrugged, offered pity, told him to move on. But one detail cut through the fog. A truck. Dark. Rusted. One headlight shattered. Someone had seen it speed out of the neighborhood right after the gunshot. Ethan latched onto that detail like a lifeline. The search began. Every night, he drove the outskirts of town, scanning side streets, diners, truck stops. His thermos of black coffee rode shotgun now, where Max used to sit. And all the while, more memories haunted him. Max barking at the door when Ethan came home from work. Max sprinting ahead on the trail, then turning back to make sure Ethan was keeping up. Max lying across the couch, snoring so loudly it shook the room. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter with each memory. His eyes burned, but no tears came. Not anymore. Then, one night, he saw it. The truck. It sat crooked outside a rundown bar, paint chipped, one headlight busted. Ethan parked across the street, every muscle in his body coiled. His pulse quickened, but not with fear. It was something else. Something colder. He watched. Hours passed. Finally, the bar door creaked open. Two men staggered out, laughing too loud, stumbling like they owned the night. One had that swagger, the careless arrogance of someone who had never been held accountable. Ethan's gut told him everything he needed to know. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. His breath slowed. This wasn't the moment to strike. Not yet. Revenge wasn't about anger. It was about patience. And patience, Ethan had in spades. He started the car. The engine purred to life. And as the two men climbed into the truck, Ethan pulled out of the shadows and followed. The hunt had officially begun. Ethan didn't sleep much anymore. His nights were spent in the car, parked far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to keep watch. The hum of the engine was his lullaby, the glow of neon bar lights his new sunrise. Dean and Tyler lived recklessly, like men who believed nothing could touch them. They picked fights in parking lots, shoved strangers out of the way, laughed too loudly, drank too much, spent too fast. Ethan watched it all, silent in the dark. But watching wasn't enough. If he was going to do this right, he needed to prepare. He started small. In his garage, he laid out tools like a surgeon before an operation. A crowbar, duct tape, a knife he hadn't touched in years. Each object gleamed under the single bulb hanging above. He tested everything. The weight of the crowbar in his hands, the sharpness of the blade. He even practiced his grip, the angle, the strike. Not because he wanted to, but because hesitation meant failure. And failure wasn't an option. Every night he rehearsed the same thought. This isn't murder. This is justice. Still, the question clawed at him in the quiet moments. Was he becoming the very thing he hated? When doubt crept in, Ethan closed his eyes and remembered Max. He remembered the first time Max leapt into his arms, knocking him over in the yard. He remembered the day Max dug up half the garden, dirt all over his paws, looking guilty until Ethan laughed for the first time in months. He remembered how Max would curl up on the floor beside him, eyes half closed, ears twitching as if he was listening to Ethan's heartbeat. Those weren't just memories. They were reminders of what was stolen. And with that, the doubt burned away. Ethan's surveillance became routine. He tracked where Dean and Tyler went. The bars, the convenience stores, the alley behind the gas station where they bought things no one asked questions about. He noticed patterns. Dean was the talker, the one who bragged, who liked attention. Tyler was different. Quiet until he snapped. He had a temper, the kind that could turn on anyone at any time. Ethan saw him shove a stranger against a wall for bumping into him, saw him break a glass bottle just to scare someone into backing down. Weaknesses. Ethan wrote them down. A notebook filled with their habits, their vulnerabilities. He studied them like prey. But Ethan wasn't careless. He knew he needed to test himself before stepping too far. One night, when Dean and Tyler stumbled out of the bar, leaving the truck unlocked, Ethan moved in. His hands shook as he gripped the handle, easing it open. The cab reeked of alcohol and smoke. Empty cans littered the floor. He didn't take anything. He didn't vandalize it. He just sat there, in their space, letting the anger simmer. It was a test. How close could he get without being seen? How much control did he still have? When he finally slipped back into his own car, heart racing, he knew the answer. He was ready. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror. His reflection stared back at him. Eyes hollow, face hardened. For the first time in years, he didn't see the broken man who had lost everything. He saw something else. A hunter. And hunters didn't wait forever. That night, when Dean left the bar alone, Ethan knew the moment had come. He gripped the wheel tighter, following at a distance, the weight of every memory pressing him forward. The leash, the empty bowl, the sound of that gunshot. He would never forget. And Dean was about to learn what it meant to be remembered. Dean was sloppy, but Ethan wasn't. He didn't strike right away. Not at the first opportunity, not even the second. For 3 nights, Ethan shadowed him, like a ghost. At the bar, at the gas station. Even when Dean stumbled into a late-night diner at 2 a.m., too drunk to stand straight, Ethan was there. Always close enough to see, but never close enough to be seen. He studied everything. The way Dean lit his cigarettes, how he favored his left hand when he drank, how he turned his back without a second thought. Dean didn't know it, but every careless move was a crack in his armor. On the 4th night, Ethan tested him. Dean walked out of the bar, fumbling with his keys. Ethan stepped from the shadows just enough to let his boots scrape against the gravel, a sound barely louder than a whisper. Dean whipped his head around, eyes narrowing. For a moment, Ethan thought he might spot him, but then Dean shrugged, muttered something under his breath, and climbed into his truck. That was all Ethan needed to know. Dean wasn't careful. He wasn't ready. And that made him vulnerable. The strike came later that week. Dean had driven to a gas station on the edge of town, the kind with flickering lights and a single bored attendant behind the counter. Ethan parked across the lot, engine silent, eyes locked on the truck. His heartbeat slow, steady, like a drum in his chest. No nerves, just clarity. When Dean came back out, cigarette in his mouth, Ethan finally moved. His boots pressed against the gravel. Quiet, deliberate. Each step brought him closer, each step heavier than the last. Dean noticed him only when he was a few feet away. "You got a problem?" Dean asked, his words thick with liquor, his smirk cocky as ever. Ethan didn't answer. Dean laughed. "What, you gonna stand there all night, huh? You lost, old man?" Still nothing. Ethan's silence was sharper than any words. Dean's laugh faltered. He shifted uncomfortably, cigarette trembling between his fingers. "Hey, what's your deal?" That's when Ethan spoke. His voice was calm, cold. "You killed my dog." The words froze Dean where he stood. The smirk drained. For the first time, his eyes darted like a trapped animal. I don't know what you're talking about," Dean stammered, but the shake in his voice betrayed him. Ethan's hand tightened on the crowbar. The weight of it felt right, like it belonged there. Dean tried to back away, but Ethan was already on him, slamming him against the side of the truck, metal groaning under the impact. The cigarette fell, sparks scattering across the ground. Dean's bravado cracked into panic. Wait, it wasn't like that. It was just a..." Ethan cut him off with a swing. Not at Dean's head, yet. The crowbar slammed into the truck beside him, the sound exploding in the night like a gunshot. Dean flinched, terror flashing in his eyes. "Please," he begged, his voice shaking. "Please, I didn't mean..." Ethan leaned close, his breath steady. "You thought it was just a dog." Dean's mouth opened to argue, but the second swing silenced him. This one across his ribs. He collapsed to the gravel, gasping, eyes wide with pain. Ethan loomed over him, calm as ever, the crowbar hanging at his side. "Wrong," he said. The final blow fell. When it was done, Ethan stood over the body, chest rising and falling, the night utterly still. There was no satisfaction, no peace, just the heavy knowledge that this wasn't over. Because Tyler was still out there. And Ethan already knew. Dean's death was only the first step. Dean's death had come and gone, but Ethan didn't sleep. He couldn't. The silence of the house was unbearable without Max's paws padding across the floor. He tried to close his eyes, but every time he saw Dean's face in those final seconds. And behind it, Tyler's smirk. Dean was only a piece of this. Ethan knew it now. The real storm was still out there, waiting. For days, Ethan tracked Tyler. He learned his patterns. Tyler worked odd jobs in construction, drifting from site to site. He never stayed long. He never built routes. He lived out of his truck, sleeping where the night carried him. But unlike Dean, Tyler was alert. His eyes were always scanning, his posture tight, his movements deliberate. He wasn't reckless. He was a predator, and predators were harder to corner. Ethan knew patience was his weapon. The first time he shadowed Tyler to a bar, Ethan didn't make a move. He just sat in his truck, watching through the windshield. Tyler never laughed, never softened, just sat in the corner with that half smirk, always with his back to the wall. Ethan watched him push a waitress too hard when she didn't bring his drink fast enough. Watched him grab a man by the shirt when he looked at him wrong. Every move told Ethan the same truth. Tyler wasn't sorry for Max. He wasn't sorry for anything. That made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. On the third night, Ethan trailed Tyler when he left the bar. The lot was quiet. Only a handful of trucks scattered under the buzzing glow of a dying streetlight. Ethan followed on foot, steps light, every nerve in his body awake. Tyler stopped at his truck, fishing out his keys. For a moment, he hesitated, head tilting, like he felt something in the air. Ethan froze in the shadows. Then Tyler smirked. "Come on out," he called. His voice echoed across the lot. Ethan's grip on the crowbar tightened. His cover was blown. He stepped forward. Not fast, not reckless. Deliberate, like every inch of ground belonged to him. Tyler leaned against the truck, unfazed. I was wondering when you'd finally crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in. Ethan's voice was calm, steady. You killed my dog. Tyler chuckled. Not the nervous kind, the confident kind. That's what this is about? A mutt? Ethan's jaw clenched. His silence spoke louder than rage. Tyler lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a drunk like Dean. They were sharp, calculating. You think Dean told me everything? Tyler said. He begged, by the way, didn't he? Ethan didn't answer. His stillness made Tyler grin wider. You thought this was about your dog? Tyler exhaled smoke into the night. It was never about that. You were supposed to feel it. The loss, the emptiness, that was the point. The words sank like lead in Ethan's chest. He took a step closer, voice low. Who sent you? Tyler smirked. You really don't know? After all this time? Ethan's hands tightened on the crowbar until his knuckles whitened. Tyler leaned forward, whispering like it was a secret meant to break him. Ask yourself who hated you enough to take the only thing you had left. Ethan's pulse thundered. His mind spun. Who? Why? Max wasn't just gone. He had been targeted. Ethan swung, rage exploding through him. The crowbar crashed against the truck door, inches from Tyler's head. Metal buckled with a scream. Tyler didn't flinch. He laughed. That temper. That's why they chose you. Ethan's voice cracked with fury. Who? But Tyler only grinned, stepping back into the shadows. You'll find out soon enough. Before Ethan could strike again, Tyler was moving. Fast, slipping into the night with the ease of a man who'd been hunted before. Ethan lunged, but by the time he reached the edge of the lot, Tyler was gone. His laughter echoed in the dark, carried away on the wind. Ethan stood alone, chest heaving, crowbar trembling in his grip. His revenge was supposed to be complete. But instead of closure, he was left with a bigger question. Dean and Tyler hadn't killed Max for no reason. Someone had wanted him broken, and now Ethan knew. The real enemy was still out there. Ethan returned home, dropped the crowbar by the door, and sat in the silence Max once filled. His hands shook, not from fear, but from certainty. This wasn't about a dog. This was about him, and whoever pulled the strings had just made a mistake, because Ethan was coming. The weeks crawled by, but Ethan didn't heal. The bruises faded. The cuts healed. But the silence? That stayed. The house was no longer a home. Every corner reminded him of Max, the empty food bowl, the leash hanging by the door, the dent in the couch cushion where Max used to curl up. He couldn't throw anything away. He couldn't move on. But he couldn't forget Tyler's words either. You were supposed to feel it. The loss, the emptiness, that was the point. Ethan replayed it every night like a broken record. Dean and Tyler hadn't killed Max for nothing. It was a message. Ethan started digging. The first place he went was Tyler's old haunts. The bar, the construction site, the truck stop on Route 9. Tyler was gone, vanished like smoke. Nobody asked where he'd gone. Nobody cared. But the silence around his disappearance felt too sharp, too practiced. People looked away when Ethan asked. Eyes shifted, words clipped short. Someone had told them to stay quiet. And Ethan knew what that meant. Tyler had protection. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of notes scribbled across napkins and receipts, Ethan closed his eyes and remembered. Max as a puppy, stumbling through the grass. Max's ears perked up whenever Ethan came home. The way Max would nudge his hand during his darkest days, like the dog knew pain before Ethan spoke it. Max had saved him more than once. And now Max was gone. Taken, not by chance, but by design. The question wasn't why Max anymore. It was why Ethan. The break came when Ethan found an old photo, not of Max, of himself. It was tucked away in a dusty box in the closet, one he hadn't opened in years. A photo from the past. A time when Ethan wasn't just a quiet man in a small town. A time when he wore a different face. A different life. A dangerous one. And suddenly, it clicked. Max hadn't been the target, he had. From that moment, Ethan knew there was no going back to silence. No going back to pretending. The past he had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. And whoever was pulling the strings, they weren't done with him yet. As Ethan tucked the photo into his jacket, headlights swept across his living room window. A car slowed outside his house. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen in the dark. Then, through the glass, he saw the silhouette of a man staring at his door. And Ethan realized he wasn't the only one digging anymore. The car didn't stay long. Just a slow roll past Ethan's house, headlights crawling across the windows like fingers of light. And then it was gone. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, crowbar leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on the street. Every passing headlight made his pulse spike. Every creak in the house made him tighten his grip. But nothing happened. By dawn, exhaustion set in. And for a moment, he convinced himself he'd imagined it. Until he saw the tire tracks. Deep grooves cut into the dirt shoulder of the road, right across from his house. Someone had stopped. Someone had watched. The days that followed felt heavier, stretched thin by unease. At the grocery store, Ethan caught the glimpse of a man's reflection in the freezer glass. A tall figure, standing a few aisles over, never shopping, never moving. By the time Ethan turned, he was gone. At the gas station, Ethan filled his tank, eyes scanning the pumps. A car sat 2 rows back, windows tinted, engine humming. When Ethan looked too long, the car pulled away. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. By the 3rd night, Ethan knew this wasn't paranoia. Someone was watching him. He couldn't help but think of the past again. The old photo. The life he had left behind. This wasn't random. Whoever was pulling the strings, they hadn't sent Tyler and Dean just to hurt him. They were testing him, pushing him, studying him, and now they wanted him to know. Flashback memories clawed their way in, sharper now. Ethan saw himself in younger years, moving through dark rooms, trading whispers for money, eyes always over his shoulder. It wasn't a clean past, and it wasn't one he was proud of, but it was a past that could make enemies. Enemies who didn't forgive. Enemies who didn't forget. On the 4th night, Ethan heard it again. That car. It idled down the road, headlights off this time, just the low growl of the engine in the dark. Ethan stood in the living room, crowbar in hand, staring out into the night. And then, faintly, the sound of a door opening. He froze. No footsteps, no voices, just the slam of a car door, then silence. The engine roared back to life. The car drove off. But when Ethan stepped outside, something was waiting for him at the edge of the driveway. A small, folded piece of paper weighed down by a rock. He knelt, hands trembling, and opened it. 3 words, scrawled in ink. "We remember you." Ethan's heart sank. Whoever was out there wasn't just watching. They knew exactly who he was, and they weren't going to stop. The note sat heavy in Ethan's hand. "We remember you." He read it again and again, like the words might change. But they didn't. And neither did the memories they stirred. That night, sleep never came. Instead, his mind dragged him back to the years before Max, before the quiet life. Back when Ethan wasn't just Ethan. He saw flashes of it like broken glass, Dark rooms filled with cigarette smoke. Men counting stacks of money on scarred tables. A younger Ethan, sharper, harder, his eyes colder than he remembered. There were meetings whispered in back alleys, deals made in silence, people who disappeared when they didn't pay what they owed. And Ethan was there, not pulling the strings, but carrying them out. He had worked for men who believed loyalty was stronger than blood. Men who didn't forgive mistakes, and he had walked away from them. At least, he thought he had. Flashback. 10 years ago. Ethan sat in the driver's seat of a rusted sedan, headlights off. The city street outside was quiet. Too quiet. A man climbed into the passenger seat, tossing an envelope onto Ethan's lap. "You didn't see me tonight," the man said. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was worth more than words. The envelope was heavy. Cash. But also, documents, names, numbers. He remembered the chill that ran through him as he glanced at the papers. It wasn't just money changing hands. It was power. It was leverage. And it was dangerous. Back in the present, Ethan stood by the window, clutching the note. That envelope had been the moment, the turning point, the reason he left that life behind. Because inside that envelope was more than secrets. It was proof. Proof that could ruin powerful men. And Ethan had made a choice that night. He kept a copy. It had been his safety net, his exit ticket. But now he wondered if it was also his curse. Because if they remembered him, they hadn't forgotten that envelope either. And if that was true, then the war that killed Max had only just begun. Ethan moved to the closet, dragging out a box buried beneath blankets and dust. His hands shook as he pulled it open. Inside wasn't the copy. That was hidden elsewhere. But taped to the lid was something else. A name. A name Ethan hadn't spoken in 10 years. And it was the same name signed at the bottom of the note he'd just been left. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. There it was, the scrawled ink on the note, the signature he hadn't seen in a decade. Adrian Voss, a name that once made entire rooms go silent. A name whispered in fear, never spoken out loud unless you had no choice. Adrian wasn't just another player in that world Ethan left behind. He was the world. He owned the streets, the docks, the people. If there was money being moved in the city, Adrian had a hand in it. And Ethan had once been his right hand. Flashback, 9 years ago. Adrian leaned across a scarred wooden desk, his gold ring catching the dim light. "You've got 2 choices, Ethan," he said, voice calm but sharp. "Stay at my side, or stay in the ground." Back then, Ethan had chosen to stay. He had carried out orders, silenced problems, enforced Adrian's will. But deep down, he'd always known he couldn't stay forever. Not with what he'd seen Adrian do. The night Ethan vanished, the night he took that envelope, was the night Adrian swore he'd never forgive him. And now, after 10 years, Adrian had found him. Ethan crumpled the note in his fist, heart pounding. This wasn't about Tyler and Dean. It wasn't about random cruelty. Max's death had been a message, a warning shot from Adrian himself. "We know where you are. We remember what you did." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he thought he'd buried along with his old life. Not just grief, not just rage, but fear. Because if Adrian Voss was coming after him, there was nowhere left to hide. Ethan stepped back from the window, staring at the shadows outside. He knew what Adrian was capable of. He'd seen it. And if Adrian had decided Ethan was unfinished business, then the quiet life was over. This was war. The city at night had a pulse of its own, neon lights buzzing, cars hissing down rain-slick streets. But inside the penthouse suite overlooking it all, The world was silent. Adrian Voss stood by the window, glass of red wine in hand. To him, the city wasn't alive. It was his. Every building, every shipment, every whispered deal in the alleys below. He owned a piece of it. And now, one piece was missing. A younger man in a tailored suit approached carefully, stopping a few steps behind him. "Sir, the message was delivered." Adrian didn't turn. He simply swirled the wine in his glass, watching the dark liquid catch the light. "And?" "He knows it was you." A faint smile touched Adrian's lips. "Good. Let him stew in it." He set the glass down on the windowsill and finally turned. His presence filled the room, even without raising his voice. "Ethan Reed thought he could walk away from me. 10 years of silence. 10 years of pretending he could be normal." He leaned closer to his enforcer. "But he knows the truth. Men like us, we don't get to retire." Flashback, 10 years ago. Adrian sat at the same desk Ethan once stood by. A storm raged outside the windows. "You're the only one I trust, Ethan," Adrian had said then, "but don't mistake trust for mercy." Back then, Ethan had taken something. An envelope thick with names, accounts, proof that could ruin Adrian's empire. Adrian never forgot. Back in the present, Adrian tapped his finger against the glass, eyes fixed on the skyline. "Tyler and Dean were just the opening act," he said coldly. "Ethan won't stop until he thinks he's won. So let him come. Let him think he's closing in." He smiled again. "Because when he does, I'll be waiting." In that moment, the camera of the story shifts. Ethan isn't the hunter anymore. He's being lured in. And Adrian Voss is the one holding the strings. The night dragged on, but Ethan couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every shadow crossing the window, all of it set his nerves on fire. He sat at the kitchen table, the note from Adrian lying open in front of him, like a wound he couldn't close. 10 years. He had believed those years were enough to bury the past, to bury himself. But Adrian's name was proof that nothing had been buried. It had only been waiting. Flashback. The happier days with Max, the dog bounding across a field, Ethan laughing as Max splashed into the water. The one creature that didn't care who Ethan had been or what he'd done. Max was his clean slate, his proof that he could love something without blood on his hands. And Adrian had ripped that away. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. Rage boiled inside him, but underneath it was something colder, something he hated to admit. Fear. Because Adrian wasn't just a man. He was a network, a web of favors, power, secrets. You didn't just fight Adrian Voss. You fought everyone tied to him. Ethan stood and moved to the garage. The old lockbox sat buried beneath tools and dust, untouched for years. His fingers trembled as he unlocked it. Inside were pieces of his old life. A pistol, still oiled and ready. Stacks of cash. A worn photograph of men he'd once called brothers, Adrian among them. And at the bottom, a folded piece of paper. His escape plan. Names, addresses, safe houses. He stared at it. The life he thought he'd never need again. But Adrian had forced his hand. Ethan whispered to himself, voice low, steady. If he wants war, he'll get one. He loaded the pistol. For the first time in a decade, Ethan Reed was stepping back into the life he swore he'd left behind. The night air was sharp as Ethan slipped into the city. His boots carried him down cracked sidewalks and past shuttered shops, streets he used to know like the back of his hand. Every corner, every alley held ghosts of who he used to be. But tonight, he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was hunting answers. Ethan's first stop was an old bar on the south side, a place where whispers traveled faster than money. The kind of place where Adrian's men were always nearby, if you knew what to look for. He stepped through the door. The air smelled of stale beer and cigarette smoke. Heads turned, but only for a second. Then everyone went back to their drinks. Ethan moved to the counter. The bartender froze when he saw him. It had been 10 years, but recognition was instant. "You're supposed to be dead," the man muttered. "Not yet," Ethan said, sliding a bill across the counter. "I'm looking for names, the ones who carried out Adrian's orders." The bartender's eyes darted nervously toward a back table where 3 men sat playing cards. Big, broad shoulders. The kind of men who didn't belong here unless they were collecting something. Adrian's men. Flashback. Adrian's orders from years ago. "Never leave loose ends," Adrian had told him once, as they stood over a man begging for his life. "You cut them out before they cut you." Now Ethan knew. Adrian was treating him like the loose end. Back in the bar, one of the card players rose, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "You picked the wrong night to show your face," the man growled. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't want blood. Not yet. But his hand brushed the pistol under his jacket. The room went quiet. The storm was about to break. Within seconds, the first man lunged. Ethan moved fast, rusty, yes, but the instincts were still there. A chair shattered. A gun flashed. Chaos erupted inside the bar. Ethan wasn't just defending himself, he was sending a message. Adrian's men would know. The ghost was back. The bar was silent now, except for the low moans of the injured. Ethan stood in the wreckage, pistol steady in his grip, every nerve alive. He'd made his point. The city would whisper by morning. Ethan Reed was back. One man was still conscious. The bruised survivor glared up at him from the floor, defiance fading into fear. Ethan crouched. "Where is Adrian?" The man shook his head, blood dripping from his lip. "People don't ask where Adrian is, he finds you." Ethan pressed the barrel against his cheek. "I'm not people." The man broke. His words spilled out in rushed fragments, names, places, safe houses, and one detail that mattered more than all the rest. Adrian was moving. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He was in the city, surrounded by a web of men, money, and steel. Flashback. Adrian's lessons years ago. "You don't fight wars head-on," Adrian's voice echoed in Ethan's mind. "You control the board. Make the other man think he's the one being hunted." Now, Adrian was playing the same game against him. Ethan left the bar and stepped into the night. The streets felt heavier, as though the city itself had shifted. Every window, every alley, seemed like another set of eyes watching. But he wasn't running anymore. He had a target. Adrian. No more lieutenants, no more pawns. Ethan would cut off the head of the snake. The survivor's words replayed in his mind, guiding his next step. An abandoned high-rise at the edge of the river, sealed off years ago after a fire. Now it was Adrian's fortress, the place where this would end. Ethan adjusted his grip on the pistol and whispered to himself, almost like a vow. "Tonight, it's just you and me, Adrian." And with that, he vanished into the dark, heading straight for the lion's den. The river smelled of rust and oil. The abandoned high-rise loomed over the water, its broken windows like dead eyes staring across the city. Once, it had been a hub of wealth and power. Now, it was Adrian's throne. Ethan crouched in the shadows, studying the building. He counted men on patrol. 2 at the front entrance, another circling the side, more on the roof. Adrian wasn't careless. He was ready. And yet, despite all the guards, Ethan knew this wasn't protection. It was bait. Adrian wanted him to come. Flashback. A night years earlier. Ethan and Adrian in a hotel suite, empty bottles and cash scattered on the table. Adrian leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. Power isn't taken, it's offered. People come to you, Reed. They can't help themselves. That's the real game. Now Ethan saw it clearly. Adrian wasn't hiding in that tower. He was waiting, like a spider in the center of its web. Ethan slipped through the perimeter, moving like a shadow. Every sound was magnified, the crunch of glass under his boot, the drip of water from broken pipes. His pistol felt heavy, not just in his hand, but in his conscience. He'd promised himself he'd never come back to this life. But here he was, because Adrian hadn't just killed his dog, he had torn open every wound Ethan had spent years trying to bury. Inside the building, the air was thick with dust and the stench of mildew. The silence was broken only by the occasional echo of boots on concrete. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, peering around a corner. 2 guards stood at the far end of the hall, rifles slung low. They weren't talking. They were waiting. A trap within a trap. Ethan's grip tightened. No more running. No more second chances. He raised his pistol, stepped into the open, and whispered, "Let's finish this." The first shot cracked through the silence, and the fortress came alive. The first gunshot tore through the silence. The 2 guards at the end of the hall crumpled, but their radios crackled instantly. "Target inside! Target inside!" The building woke up like a machine. Shouts echoed through the halls, boots thundered against concrete, rifles clattered into position. Ethan was moving before the bodies hit the ground. The first floor. The ambush. From the shadows, 6 men rushed him, rifles spraying wildfire. Ethan dropped behind a crumbling pillar, bullets chipping the stone. He breathed once, then leaned out. 3 clean shots. 3 bodies dropped. He shoved a broken table over for cover, reloaded, and moved fast. Every step was calculated, every shot precise. By the time he reached the stairwell, the floor was silent except for the hum of dying radios. The second floor. The maze. The hallways here were tighter, broken cubicles stacked like a maze. Shapes darted between the gaps, shadows shifting. The men didn't rush him this time. They stalked him. Flashback, a training drill years ago. Adrian's voice behind him. "Control the angles. If you give them your back, you're already dead." Ethan lowered his breathing, moving slow, pistol raised. 1 guard lunged around the corner. Ethan dropped him with a shot to the chest. Another tried to flank. Ethan smashed him into the wall, snapped his arm, and fired point blank. By the time he reached the next stairwell, the walls were slick with silence again. The third floor. The flood. This one was different. They were waiting in numbers. 12 men, rifles, shotguns, even body armor. They lit the stairwell the second Ethan's head appeared. He dropped low, bullets raining over him, and spotted something. A leaking pipe, spewing gas. He fired 1 shot into it. The explosion ripped through the floor, fire chewing up the ceiling. Men screamed, smoke filled the air. Ethan pushed through the chaos, coughing, his pistol barking fire. When the flames died down, the floor was nothing but rubble and ash. The 4th floor. The sniper. The wide-open space of the 4th floor was a killing ground. From the far end, a sniper's scope glinted. The first shot cracked past Ethan's ear, close enough to burn. He dove behind cover, glass raining around him. The sniper was patient, precise. Each shot boxed Ethan in tighter. Flashback. Max bounding through a field, barking with joy. The sound of freedom. The sound Ethan had lost. His jaw tightened. He grabbed a chunk of broken mirror, angled it, and caught the glint of the scope again. He fired once. The rifle clattered. Silence. Ethan moved on. By the time he reached the final stairwell, his body ached. Blood streaked down his arm, and smoke clung to his lungs. But he was still standing. Above him, the last floor. Adrian's floor. The fortress had tested him. It had tried to break him, and failed. Ethan gripped the stair rail, lifted his pistol, and climbed. The stairwell door groaned open. Ethan stepped into the top floor. Quiet, too quiet. The space was stripped bare. Just concrete walls, broken windows, and a single leather chair turned toward the city lights. Adrian Voss sat there, calm, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon. His voice cut the silence like a blade. "Adrian, you made it. I wondered if you'd survive the climb." Ethan raised his pistol, but Adrian only smiled. "You haven't changed. Same eyes, same anger. Always rushing in with a gun instead of thinking." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You killed Max." Adrian's laugh was sharp, cold. "A dog? That's what this is about? You've painted this place red for an animal?" Ethan's finger hovered on the trigger, but Adrian leaned forward, the smirk never leaving his face. "No, Ethan. This isn't about the dog. The dog was just the thread. Pull it and all of this unravels. You, me, the past we built, the empire we burned. You couldn't let it stay buried, could you?" Flashback. Ethan and Adrian at a table years ago, counting money, guns stacked in the corner, two brothers in arms. Adrian's voice then. "One day you'll see. You can't escape men like us." Back in the present, Ethan's hand shook for a moment. Adrian noticed. He always noticed. "Adrian, you think killing me will give you peace? You think it will bring your mutt back? You're wrong. This won't end here. Even if you shoot me, this war keeps going. You'll just be another ghost wandering the ashes." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "Maybe. But tonight, it ends with you." The two men locked eyes. No more words, no more lies. Just years of betrayal, loss, and rage pressing down on the room. Ethan's finger curled around the trigger. Adrian stood, slowly, deliberately, setting his glass aside. He pulled a knife from his belt, its edge gleaming in the city light. No more games, no more talking. This was it. Two men. One final reckoning. The air hung heavy between them. Ethan's pistol raised. Adrian's knife gleamed. Then, chaos. Adrian lunged first, the blade flashing. Ethan fired, but Adrian twisted, the shot grazing his shoulder. The knife cut across Ethan's arm, tearing flesh. Both men stumbled back, eyes locked, breathing ragged. The brawl begins. They crashed into each other, fists and fury. Ethan slammed Adrian into a pillar, driving his shoulder into his ribs. Adrian countered, headbutting him hard enough to blur his vision. The pistol clattered to the ground, sliding out of reach. Now it was raw, personal. Punches echoed off concrete. Each strike wasn't just violence, it was history. Years of trust shattered. Each blow carried betrayal. Each grunt a memory of what they once were. Flashback, the past brotherhood. Ethan and Adrian in a safe house, laughing over drinks. Max curled on the floor beside them, Adrian raising a glass. To family, to loyalty. Ethan smiling back. Back to the present. Adrian's fist slammed into Ethan's jaw. Blood sprayed. Ethan spat it out and hit back twice as hard. The knife Adrian slashed again, catching Ethan across the ribs. Ethan roared, grabbing Adrian's wrist, twisting until bones popped. The knife clanged to the floor. Adrian kicked Ethan back, sending him sprawling. Both men staggered, chests heaving, sweat and blood painting their skin. Words between blows. Adrian sneered through broken teeth. "You always thought you were better. Cleaner. But look at you now. No different than me." Ethan wiped blood from his mouth, voice steady through the rage. "I was never like you." The finish, they charged, colliding like animals. Ethan drove Adrian into the broken windows, glass shattering around them. Adrian clawed at him, snarling, but Ethan pinned him, fists raining down one after another. years of betrayal crushed into each strike. Adrian's strength faltered. His voice broke into a wheeze. "You can't kill me. Ethan, you need me. Without me, you're nothing." Ethan froze, just for a heartbeat. Flashback. Max running into his arms, tail wagging, joy in its purest form. Ethan's jaw clenched. His voice came low, final. "I already have everything I need." He drove Adrian through the window. The glass exploded outward, and Adrian's scream tore into the night as he plummeted into the dark. Silence followed. The room stood still, broken glass glittering in the moonlight. Ethan leaned against the wall, chest heaving, staring out at the void where Adrian once stood. It was over. Or was it? The rooftop was silent. Only the wind moved, carrying faint echoes of the city below. Broken glass crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he stepped back from the shattered window. His chest rose and fell, every breath heavy with exhaustion. His knuckles were raw, dripping blood that mingled with Adrian's on the concrete floor. For the first time in weeks, Ethan lowered his guard. He holstered his weapon. Slowly, painfully, he dropped into the same leather chair Adrian had been sitting in moments before. It groaned under his weight. His head leaned back, eyes closing, as the adrenaline drained from his body. Flashback, Max bounding through the tall grass of a quiet field, barking happily as Ethan laughed, free for the first time in years. The memory burned warm and painful in his chest. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. He whispered into the empty room, "Rest easy, boy. It's done." For a long time, he sat in silence, staring at the horizon as dawn crept in, painting the sky in pale shades of gold. Then, he stood. No grand speech, no dramatic exit. Just a man with blood on his hands and scars carved deeper than any wound. He walked down the stairwell, each step echoing like a farewell. When he reached the street, the city was alive again. Cars passing, people moving, life carrying on, untouched by the war he'd just survived. Ethan slipped into the crowd, faceless, silent. Not a hero, not a villain, just a man who had lost and taken back what little peace he could. The camera lingers on the street corner where he disappears, the bustle of life swallowing him whole. And then, fade to black.